Welcome back to Doing Management Research. I want to talk about method. So we talked about research design last time, saw some examples. Now I want to talk about the great divide between quantitative and qualitative research. We won't be going into details about specific methods because that really would require too much time. There are so many methods, we can't talk about everything. But I'd like to talk about the main differences and the advantages or the rationale for choosing one, the other, or even both. So first thing, and that's a little cartoon, the way I feel is hard to quantify. How do you approach that? And obviously the question is, how hard on a scale of 1 to 10? And so, some people would say, well, that's a qual situation. I want to investigate, to talk with this person, interact with them. I want to understand how they feel, and that's how I can get my, proper theory about, their situation. Some others would say, no, that's not how you do it. That's much too subjective. What you are going to do, and that's the only way to do it, and they both be persuaded, it's the only way to do it. You want to actually to give them a good questionnaire, and in the end, well, you know what it is about, you know the situation, you don't understand properly. And obviously both arguments are true. It depends what you want to measure, it depends what you want to achieve. So basically, both are highly scientific. Remember, the criteria we chose for scientificity is that you have a systematic way to approach things, and that is rigorous, and that's you are doing things according to your paradigm, according to what you have chosen as the criteria for the truth. So it's not really bad or good, or one is not better than the other. You want to achieve the same thing, and it has to correspond again to your research question, to the type of design you have chosen. So both are highly scientific. Now what's really important is that yes, there is a divide between quant and qual, but it's often more complex than we think. You have a summary on the slides about different types of approaches to qual and quant, but basically you already have a vertical separation between what is data collection and data treatment. So you can have, for instance, qualitative data that will be treated quantitatively, right? So some people will tell you, well, quant is stats. Some people will tell you quant is number. But, there's not one definition. It would be more rigorous to talk about the type of data you're using and the type of treatment you are doing for this data. That's probably more precise. Now let's see some, what are qualitative data compared to quantitative data. Qualitative data are basically non-numerical data. So it's, for instance, verbal data, and that's very often what you will have. Text, speech, people you have interviewed, videos of people, maybe you have observed something and you have recorded a video of a meeting. We did a project on temporary organizations 2 years ago, and we recorded every meeting of the teams of a big event in Sydney. A lot of speech, a lot of verbal data. It can be text in documents, that's word too, but then you can have a lot of non-verbal things. So you can observe behaviors. On a video you can observe behaviors. You can see if people are tense, or you can observe when you are there, you can take notes. You can use images, expressions, etc. Things that will actually, that you will then be able to interpret. Quant is much more simple. It's actually a very broad spectrum of things. But quantitative data are numbers. There are different types of numbers. It can be numbers resulting from a survey. It can be numbers resulting from maybe network data that you have on a database. It can be a database of patents. in a specific industry or across industry. It can be a database of alliances in a specific industry. And you can obtain it through a survey, or because the data is already there, because maybe it has been stored in a telephonic connector or something like this. So that's what you have. That's the raw material. And it can be quantitative or qualitative. Now then you can treat it with qualitative tools or quantitative tools. So let me give you a few examples. The most common things that we'll do with text, and especially discourse, is, but text in general, is content analysis. Very often content analysis is associated with the idea that discourse or text reflect reality. So I'll use, my interviews, I'll code them, and that gives me a fair idea about what people think. Now, if you're a bit more skeptical and a bit more critical, you probably don't think that discourse reflects reality. You probably think that discourse actually shapes reality. In that case, what you'll do is probably discourse analysis. So you'll try to understand how the structure of what people are telling you as a reflection of some other forces. For instance, you'll try to understand the image they are trying to project. You try to understand if they are trying to influence you or any other listeners by what they are saying. So discourse is not neutral. You need to analyze it in a specific way, and there are many approaches to that, to understand the reality that is that of the actors, or that's constructed behind the discourse, the reality that the discourse constructs. You can use quantitative data, such as network data, who is connected with whom, and produce social network mapping, and then interpret these maps. Well, to map the things, you need to use quant, but once you have the map, it's qualitative interpretation. It can be. You could also use the same data and do a quantitative treatment. That's very possible with social network data. Another so-called qualitative treatment, which is really interesting because that is really to map, to draw cognitive maps. So it's not quantitative. You'll connect concepts with each other. So, when people talk about a specific concept in an organization, they tell you, well, when we decide something in this organization, we always take into account the opinion of the CEO. Well, what you'll do, you start to draw concept maps. So you'll connect the opinion of the CEO with the decision of a specific person or the decision-making process. So it can tell you, well, we always start by considering what the CEO will think. So you'll put that in a map, for instance, of your process, and that's what people do when they start to decide. That's very qualitative. It's graphic, but it's not quant. And then you have a lot of quantitative treatment possibilities. Obviously, the most common is statistical models. You'll create a model based on a survey that you have run or a database. But you can do things that are more exploratory. You can construct a simulation that will help you to understand the impact that something can have on another thing. And there are very interesting research on crisis management where they try to simulate the impact of the decisions within an organization. You can just try to make sense of a very complex set of data by classifying. You have method of classification that will help you create a typology. You have a lot of data in an industry. You want to create strategic groups, people who follow the same type of strategy. Well, let's mix all this data, use a method that will classify the companies, and then see if you can interpret what in the different group, which means you are back to qual. You can do chronological analysis. We have talked about that, to look at connection between different phases in a process. Linguistic analysis, where you will actually count the types of words and the connection between the words, and that will give you some indication where you can, analyze, let's say statistically, the type of discourse you are analyzing. You can do social network analysis instead of social network mapping that we did earlier. And in that case, you will try to find correlations, for instance, or connection. You can have correlation between two networks. Is there a correlation between the structure of the network of a CEO and the structure of the network of the firm, for instance? If you are not happy with, qual cognitive map, you can make them quant. And actually, it's a method that's very similar to what you do for social network. So you start to represent your conceptual maps and then put that in a matrix that's behind the maps. And then you can compare your matrix. So you can take thousands of individuals based, for instance, on their search profile on internet, and try to compare all these maps, all the patterns of the searches that these people have done, to try to have, again, a typology of behaviors, or to correlate some, cognitive maps, some things that they have done with specific behaviors. And you can start to do quantitative analysis of a specific content by counting words, how many times people have said this or that, which sometimes will be very close to what you would do in linguistic analysis. All right? So basically, we won't review all the methods, but there is a broad spectrum. And it's important to not, classify too quickly a specific research into quant or qual.